Hello and welcome to the Starting Necron series, the series in which we go from your first purchase to your first 2000 point army list and everything in between for the Necron forces. In this video we'll be covering the elite choices for the Necrons, and as the elite slot for the Necrons is heavily filled with different choices, some of the choices will have to be discussed rather quickly. However, one thing I'll say, despite the number of choices they have, it's not an overwhelmingly dominant unit type choice for their forces, so it's a bit interesting in that sense because it seems very well balanced for how much it offers. Additionally, those will be covered in units that have seen the most tournament play to the least tournament play. In some cases, the units will be tied for the same amount of plays, so in that case, I'll use my best judgment in terms of what unit goes where. So let's get right into the content. The first unit on our list is the Cryptothralls, and the Cryptothralls were already covered in the HQ choice video, and in most cases, they're more of a piece of war gear for the cryptics than an elite slot choice in themselves, but some lists have ran them independently as well due to how good they can be for their points cost. In this video, we'll give a quick rundown of what they do, that being that they're a low cost unit that doesn't take up a force organization slot when taken alongside a cryptic and can be rather powerful in combat when near a cryptic, while also being inexpensive in points. Although as a result, they do have a very limited squad size of 2. If you wish to learn more about the Cryptothralls, check out the HQ choice video. For the first dedicated elite choice specifically, we have the Canoptek Spyders. The Canoptek Spyder is a rather powerful unit coming in at 60 points and boasting a rather nice stat line in terms of durability, as it comes in at 6 toughness, 6 wounds, and has a 3+ base save. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with any invulnerable save or anything of that sort. However, it does falter a little when it comes to mobility, with a rather slow speed of 6 inches in the movement phase, and its accuracy is only 4+ on the ballistic skill and weapon skill. As for damage output, it does come with Automaton Claws, which takes its 5 attacks up to strength 8 with 3 armor penetration and 2 damage for each wound it makes. This is a weapon that can tear into vehicles and other units with heavy armor rather easily. In terms of shooting, the Spyders do not come with a ranged weapon naturally, but surprisingly most lists upgrade them to have 2 particle beamers, which brings them up to 70 points per model and gives them 12 assault shots with a strength of 5 and a range of 18 inches. The particle beamers don't have any armor penetration and are only 1 damage per wound, which is why I'm a bit surprised by their popularity. However, they do get a lot of shots for the points cost, and Necrons have a ton of mid-range and high-end armor penetration weapons, so this might be the most efficient way of gaining anti-swarm firepower for dealing with targets with poor armor profiles and lots of models. In addition to all of this, the Spyder has a couple other optional upgrades, the first being a Gloom Prism, which allows it to try and deny psychic powers as if it was a Psyker. Generally, you'll want 1 in each squad of Spyders, as you only need 1 for the squad, and the Spyders can oftentimes see play as a maximum squad of 3, which means you can use the first 2 as buffers for the third, which has the Gloom Prism, and save some points by not taking the maximum number of prisms on all of your Spyders. The other upgrade that the Spyders can take is the Fabricator Claw Array, which allows them to repair D3 wounds on friendly vehicles of the same dynasty. This item costs the same as the Gloom Prism and can be taken alongside the Prism, but in most cases this isn't really worth it due to the living metal and the rarity of vehicles within the Necron forces as it is. More so, the Spyders aren't really vehicle escorts and are better with Scarabs, as they naturally have a special ability called Scarab Hive that says any unit of Scarabs within 6 inches of the Spyders have 1 model reanimated in your command phase. Keep in mind this affects every Scarab unit within 6 inches, but each Scarab unit can only be affected once per phase, so you can have multiple units of Spyders, but not every unit needs to escort the Scarabs. This is a rather powerful ability overall, as the Scarabs are rather good, and this helps keep them around while giving you a unit that is rather powerful in itself even without escorting the Scarabs. Something odd about the Spyders is that it's not a vehicle but rather a monster, which means it can fire its weapons in melee, but it also has the exploding ability when it's destroyed, which makes it more like a vehicle than a monster, but I'm guessing it wasn't made a vehicle due to the Fabricator Claws, as the Spyders would be able to repair one another otherwise. To wrap up the Spyders as a unit, it doesn't have any special stratagems outside of the Enslaved Protectors, which all Canoptek units have, but even without any stratagems, it's still a formidable unit in terms of what it can do within a game, and that's probably why it's a very common unit within army lists. The second dedicated elite choice in terms of popularity is the Catan Shard of the Nightbringer. The Nightbringer is the most popular Catan Shard, but it's also the most expensive one of them in terms of points after the recent points change that increases points cost to a total of 370 points. Even with the points change, the Nightbringer is an absolute beast of a unit that can do some serious damage in melee while being very hard to destroy. For survivability and mobility, the Nightbringer moves at a reasonable speed of 8 inches and has a toughness of 7 as well as a wound profile of 9. In addition to that, like all Catan, the Nightbringer has the Necrodermis ability, which gives him a 4+ invulnerable save that also prevents him from losing more than 3 wounds in any one phase. Combine that with the Living Metal ability that heals 1 wound on your command phase, and this model requires a lot of thought from your opponent if they want to destroy it before it causes some serious damage to their army. But do keep in mind that due to its Enslaved Star God ability, it's easier for your opponent to target the Nightbringer, as it cannot carry any relics or traits, while also not benefiting from the Lookout Sir ability. This means an opponent that can target the Nightbringer in their Psychic phase, Shooting phase, and Melee phase can still destroy him in 1 round of battle if they focus enough fire at the Nightbringer. In terms of damage output, the Nightbringer has a 2+ weapon skill and comes with 6 base attacks, as well as a base strength of 7. The Scythe weapon the Nightbringer carries has 2 profiles, letting you choose which one it's used in, with the first weapon profile being the Reaping Sweep that uses the base strength of the Nightbringer, has 3 armor penetration, but only 1 damage per wound. In addition to that, the Sweeping profile makes 2 hit rolls for each attack, meaning the Nightbringer produces 12 melee attacks in this mode. The second mode is the Entropic Blow, which doubles the base strength of the Nightbringer, has a high armor penetration of 4, and does d6 damage per wound, while also ignoring invulnerable saves of the target. On top of those abilities, the Nightbringer has the Drain Life ability, which causes all of its melee attacks to negate any ability that ignores wounds, meaning enemies don't gain any Feel No Pain save and potentially don't gain an invulnerable save if the Entropic Blow mode is used. There is also a generic Catan stratagem known as Entropic Strike, which for 2 command points that gives any attack made by any Catan using this stratagem the ability to ignore invulnerable saves. All of this makes the damage output against otherwise durable units very high for the Nightbringer, as all of his attacks function as pseudo-mortal wounds, although the damage does not carry over from one model to the other if he does overkill it. The Nightbringer, like all Catan, also has access to the powers of the Catan, with all of the named Catan picking one from a generic table and then having a unique power of the Catan if they're named Catan. All of the Catan powers generate mortal wounds in one form or another and are differentiated primarily by the conditions needed to generate those wounds, as well as the top end of the wounds that they can generate. The special Catan power for the Nightbringer is no exception, being a hypercharged version known as the Gaze of Death that selects an enemy within 9 inches and visible to the Nightbringer and produces d3 mortal wounds for each 4+ rolled on 3d6 against that unit. Those mortal wounds can quickly add up on a good roll, making the Nightbringer all the more deadly. And don't forget, you can manifest a special and normal power in the same turn as well, so you can really create a ton of mortal wounds with a Catan, especially the Nightbringer, who has the most ability to do so. The Catan even have 2 stratagems that interact with the Catan powers, the first being the Strange Echo stratagem, which lets you spend 1 command point to swap out the power with a different one, meaning you can be rather flexible with how you choose your powers of the Catan throughout the game based on the targets. The second stratagem lets the Nightbringer cast a random power at the end of the movement phase by rolling a d6 on the power table for 1 command point thanks to the Dimensional Destabilization stratagem. This is also rather good as all of the powers are rather decent and all of them produce mortal wounds, so it gives you even more mileage within regards to the mortal wounds that a Catan can generate. If you're still not content with how many mortal wounds the Nightbringer can produce, both with the powers and the pseudo-mortal wounds with the Entropic Blow or the Entropic Strikes, it also has its own version of exploding upon death called Reality Unravels, which generates mortal wounds on a roll of 4+ after it is destroyed. So as a whole, the Nightbringer is an incredibly durable and powerful unit that requires immediate attention from your opponent to combat. However, the Nightbringer does cost quite a bit in terms of points, and you're only allowed 1 Catan per detachment, which limits them a bit overall. Even with that in mind, most armies can easily include 1 Catan shard as a model that requires your opponent's full attention and can still do enough damage in many cases. In third place for the elites, the Lychguard take the spot. The Lychguard are a unit that has seen some reasonable popularity lately, and it's a unit that can be rather powerful, although it does compete with a lot of units that fill the role of the durable melee power unit. Their most common weapon loadout is the Dispersion Shield and the Hyperphase Sword, also known as a sword and a board, which provides them with a weapon that adds 1 strength to their attacks, making them have 6 strength, 3 armor penetration, and 1 damage at a weapon skill of 3+, while their survivability goes up to a 2+ normal save and a 4+ invulnerable save. That's a relatively good profile for 28 points. But they do only have a 5-inch movement speed that makes them rather slow and makes me like the race a little bit more in terms of that specific unit role. However, the Lychguard also have the core ability, which means they can be the target of Veil of Darkness, and you can easily take a unit of 5 to 10 of them and veil them into position to get around their movement speed, as they're durable enough to survive until reinforcements arrive while putting out good damage in melee. They can even increase their melee damage with the Eternal Protector stratagem that costs 1 command point and gives them an extra attack if they are within 3 inches of a friendly Dynasty Noble. bubble. Inversely, you can swap out the sword and shield for a war scythe, which doesn't increase their points cost, but does give them a weapon that doubles their strength, has an armor penetration of 4, and a damage characteristic of 2. While this can be rather good, it does make them a much more fragile unit, and the Triarch Praetorians are probably a better alternative for that type of unit in terms of damage output due to their mobility and profile overall. Finally, the Lychguard have the Guardian Protocol's aura, which makes friendly Dynasty nobles and Dynastic Agent-friendly nobles untargetable to range weapons if they are within 3 inches of the Lychguard. All of this makes the Lychguard a good durable option that can be rather strong thanks to the core keyword, but they are a bit slower in terms of mobility than I'd like them to be. Although with that in mind, the model is rather cool, and I see a lot of reason to run them if you like that kind of unit. In 4th place for the dedicated elite units, we have the Skorpekh Destroyers. The Skorpekh Destroyer is a bit odd in that they not only have a bit of a weird loadout, but also the Skorpekh Destroyer was a unit that was very popular when the Codex came out, but has fallen off a bit in terms of how often it shows up in lists nowadays. I think a lot of that is due to how many choices the Necrons have, and these guys are one that competes with a lot of options that do something similar. This doesn't necessarily make them worse than any of those options, it's just that there are a lot of ways for the Necrons to fill out the melee threat niche, and which of those options is the most popular in that slot can change due to a myriad of different factors. To begin with, the Skorpekh Destroyer costs 35 points per model and comes in a base unit of 3 with the ability to go up to 6 models for the unit. Their stats are rather reasonable, having an 8-inch movement speed, a 3+ weapon skill, a strength and toughness of 5, and 3 wounds per model. Due to their decent toughness and multiple wounds, they aren't the softest targets, but for durability, they only have a 3+ normal save. The Destroyers have 3 attacks each baseline, but their weapons are a bit odd in that every 2 Destroyers need to have hyperphase threshers, which give them an additional attack and user base strength with an armor penetration of 3 and a damage characteristic of 2. The 3rd Destroyer has to have a hyperphase reblade, which gives the Destroyer 2 extra strength and comes with an armor penetration of 4 as well as a baseline damage of 3. But the reblade does not add an extra attack like the threshers do. Both weapons are somewhat comparable, and in reality, as you have such a limited number of reblades, you should just assume they all have threshers, and having 5 Destroyers in a squad instead of 6 is a reasonable option as a result because that gives you the most mileage out of the extra attacks on the threshers. That being said, the reblade isn't bad and can sometimes be clutch, so there is some justification for taking the 6th Destroyer specifically. Outside of that, the Skorpekh Destroyers have all of the normal Destroyer Cult and Necron abilities, including Hardwired for Destruction, which gives them the ability to reroll hit rolls of 1. They also have the semi-special Whirling Onslaught stratagem that for 1 command point subtracts 1 from their enemy's wound rolls for the duration of the phase, and that can be rather powerful as it can really mess up some of the high strength options that your opponent has, and that can give them a lot more survivability in some cases. As a whole, I think the Skorpekh Destroyers are rather good and could easily see play again as they fill a specific niche that happens to be shared with things like the Lychguard, Praetorians, and other units of that sort, meaning that those type of units will rotate in a sense that you could see several of them in the same list, but there will be times where some don't see as much play while others see much more play, and then as time goes on, that can change to reverse or even change completely, but I think you'll see each of those units show up over time as things change and the meta evolves. Now, while the first 4 dedicated units on this list have seen extensive tournament play, and the Cryptothralls, which we count as more of an HQ option, see more play than anything, the following units see fringe play and oftentimes show up in lists once in a while, giving them a lot of complexity, and it's very hard to determine which ones will see significant play as time goes on, and which ones will kind of fall off as well, because some of them might be more meta dependent, and some of them might be more dependent on a certain unit's playstyle, while others might see more play as certain dynasties become more popular, or slight point changes happen to the different units. The first of these units, and the 5th overall dedicated elite slot choice, is the Deathmarks. Deathmarks are a unit I'm rather conflicted with, as on one hand they look really cool and they can be potentially rather good, but on the other hand they always feel a bit expensive for what they do. Each Deathmark costs 18 points and you can take them in squads of 5 to 10 models. They're slow moving units with a movement speed of 5 inches, but have a high ballistic skill of 2+, which works well with their only weapon being a Synaptic Disintegrator, which has 1 heavy shot at 36 inches, with a profile of strength 5, 2 armor penetration, and 1 damage, none of which is that impressive, but it does have a special ability that ignores Lookout Sir and can target characters even if they're within range of other units, while also generating 1 additional mortal wound on a roll of 6 to wound. On average, with a unit of 10 Deathmarks, you'll generate roughly 1 mortal wound with this ability. Sometimes you'll get up to 2 mortal wounds, and if you're really lucky, you can get more than that, but it's very unlikely. So the normal profile of this weapon is more important than the mortal wound generation that it can provide. One other thing to keep in mind is that they have the core and Hyperspace Hunter keyword, with the latter of the keywords allowing them to use the Aetheric Interception Stratagem for 1 command point that lets you select an enemy unit that came onto the table that turn during your opponent's reinforcement step and target it as if it was your shooting phase with the unit of Deathmarks. Additionally, if they are in reserves when this occurs, they teleport onto the table within 18 inches of the enemy unit, but 9 inches away from any enemy unit, including that unit, and then they can shoot as if it was their shooting phase. This does give you a good amount of mileage from this unit and can do a lot of work if an enemy is dependent on bringing in objective or power units from reserves. Speaking of reserves, the Deathmarks also have the Dimensional Translocation ability, which functions as Deep Strike and allows them to naturally set up in reserves and works rather well with the Interception ability if needed. In addition to their normal 3+ save, reanimation protocols, dynasty abilities, and 5 toughness, it makes them a bit harder for your opponents to deal with before they get to shoot a full volley of fire off at full strength. All of that being said, this is why it's somewhat of a hard unit to quantify, as it's not cheap in points and has limited shooting that isn't strong but isn't weak either, and they can function as a deep strike unit to grab objectives or perform actions as needed as well. Maybe that's why I'm so torn on them, as I think of them as a high power shooting unit, when in reality they're an infiltration unit that has long range shooting that is reasonably good and can be improved by being in the Mephrit dynasty specifically. Thinking of them in that sense as opposed to an elite sniper unit, it does make them a lot more interesting and does make them seem a lot better than I thought they would be at first glance. So I guess discussing them here has changed my mind on them a little bit, and I think it's something players are maybe underutilizing because they're a unit that can definitely do a lot of interesting tricks in that sense. Anyway, this video is starting to get a little long and there's still more than half of the different elite choices to cover, so I think I'm going to cut this video off here and then continue within the next video, continuing with the elite choices after the units mentioned here. That video will be a part 2 to this video and will come out pretty soon, considering everything has been scripted and recorded already, so it makes it a lot easier to put it out quickly as opposed to having to do everything from scratch. Anyway, as always, if you've enjoyed the content, please remember to like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out, and if you know anyone who can benefit from this video or any of the other videos on my channel, please do share the content, as it can help other players out in terms of buying and building an army. And as always, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons for supporting the channel. Thank you very much, you guys are awesome people, and regardless if you're a patron or not, thank you for watching and have a great day. See you next time. Bye.